Thanks for joining us. The festivities are upon us. We're going to be celebrating Hari Raya in just 2 weeks from now. And of course, we also want to acknowledge that situations may arise where mental health might be the topic of the day. In my office right now is Chris Henshaw, a clinical psychologist that can talk to us about some of the developments regarding mental health and perhaps how we can approach the festivities. Chris, thanks very much for coming over.
Thank you so much for having me.
But prior to doing the show, you were talking about the two big surveys that the MOH has done on mental health. And of course, the findings of that is that incidences of mental health cases are now increasing. Maybe you can talk to us about what these two surveys are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't do massive surveys every single year because they're very expensive. So one was done in 2019, just before COVID. And then the other one was done in 2023. That's the most recent. And actually, just recently, it's past the fifth anniversary of the MCO, right? So between those two surveys,
2 days ago,
between those two surveys, we had a pretty globally significant event, right, which was COVID. And what we found was, what they found was that incidence had pretty much doubled, across multiple things. So across depression, we're looking at 4% now. Moderate and mild anxiety was around 35% of Malaysians, which is extremely high. That's a third of people. And substance use disorders. This isn't just people who have tried drugs or have a drink every now and again, but properly diagnosable addiction issues is sitting around 1 million people in Malaysia. So it's a significant problem.
And of course, I want to discuss a little bit more about the findings, but I just want to clarify one thing. Is it more of prevalence across the society and we're just getting better at diagnosing, or even people self-identifying, or is it truly incidences where cases are indeed increasing? Can we determine that point?
It's really difficult to break those two things apart because but in the case of these specific surveys done, it's likely the prevalence actually increasing because these were active surveys done where you go and ask people. Right? Now, we do see data increasing in terms of incidence of mental health because we are having more people who are psychiatrists, more people who are psychologists, more counselors and stuff. And in fact, there was a great article in the Star recently about how Malaysians are now more willing than ever to seek mental health care, which is fantastic. But we do have to ask why that is, right? So there's maybe a changing cultural aspect that people are more willing to seek, which makes the incidences look higher. But there's also the fact that as incidences rise, you're going to have more people seeking.
Then I really need to talk about the demand and supply curve, because while the demand is high in terms of more people willing to take the first step forward in seeking mental health care, the providers aren't a lot. And maybe you can talk to us through that effect in terms of counselors and clinical psychologists and psychiatrists, and how deeply left for wanting Malaysia is when it comes to this point.
Yeah, so we have Malaysian healthcare is split into sort of a public healthcare system, private healthcare system duality, right? So you can go to HKL or you can go to Selayang, one of these public hospitals, and you can get seen there. Or if you prefer, you can go to some private clinic or hospital as well. Now, for serious mental health care issues, one of the issues you can run into is that they cause people to become often less productive, less able to cope with their lives, which can impact on their financial well-being, impact on their job security, and things like that, which then makes it much less likely they're able to find private, right? So you get a lot of pressure onto the public purse with mental health. And this is where you'll see HKL, for example, is our biggest, but other hospitals around, there's a lot, psychiatrists really get the brunt of it with critical cases, right? So someone has a mental health break, someone is actively suicidal, they need to be warded to protect themselves, they will be sent to a hospital. And because that psychiatrists are under a lot of pressure, right? They have to see a lot of clients throughout a lot of patients throughout a day, a lot of clients throughout a day if they're in private practice, and they often don't have time to do things like therapy, because it's time consuming. Despite the fact that they would like to, they're more pressured into doing diagnostic assessment, and then medication. And then what that does is, well, where do people go for therapy? So ideally, if someone has like a really serious clinical case, the therapy would be done by a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist. But there's only, just over 400 clinical psychologists in the country. That's one for every nearly 1 million Malaysians.
Yeah, I mean, 32 million local Malaysians, plus expats, plus undocumented migrants and workers, 40 million. So that's 400 for 40 million.
Yeah, exactly. And so the issue you run into, and the amount of care isn't evenly spread throughout the population, right? So you get a lot more in KL. I'd be very surprised if many of those undocumented migrants ever see a psychologist or counselor. And so with such a low amount of clinical psychologists, people go to counselors, and counselors are fantastic, right? They're really well trained in Malaysia. There's a good counselor culture in this country. Counselors are able to do a lot of work. But for very severe clinical cases of high levels of suicidality, cases of eating disorders, cases of drug addiction, and situations of schizophrenia, PTSD, stuff like that, you want someone who's been trained in clinical disorders as well as in therapy, right? And counselors are often now they're getting there, but the reason they're getting there is because they're almost forced to. They do it through ongoing training after they graduate. They get clinical experience through their practice. And it's not really fair to them, and it's not really fair to the psychiatrists either, that this middle group, which can do the assessment and the diagnostics and can do this therapy with these populations, just isn't there, just not present.
Okay, and while we can talk about the dearth of clinical psychologists here in Malaysia, what would be the diagnosis of it and perhaps the prescription for it, I suppose, when it comes to getting more folks to become clinical psychologists? Is it more schools? Is it more training? How does it work?
So we're seeing really good progress, right? So I think Taylor's just launched a new program a year or two back. UCSI has one now. HELP and UKM and a few other universities have been going for a while. So we're graduating more clinical psychologists than we ever have, which is great. There's a bottleneck though, right? Which is that, the same way a lawyer might do a pupillage or a doctor has their residency when they graduate to get them real clinical experience hands-on with patients. It's not just book knowledge. Clinical psychologists are no different. We're expected to go through 1,500 hours of clinical practice over the course of a year, supervised by an experienced...
1,500 hours of supervised...
Yes, absolutely. And if there are places that are not giving people that, that's falling below the standard, right? Like that is what someone really should have in order to be able to go out and practice on their own without supervision, because it is through that training, through that time, through that supervisor telling you you're doing this wrong, you need to consider that you become competent, right? And so the issue you have is that there's only 400 odd clinical psychologists. Not all of them are experienced enough to be supervisors, right?
Yeah. So that basically cuts it down to what, 200 maybe?
Let's say. And then of that, not everyone wants to be a supervisor because it's not particularly lucrative. It's quite a lot of work, right? And you have to manage a bunch of people who don't really know what they're doing. It can be frustrating.
Intense, basically.
It's intense, and it can put your name and your practice in a position because there's someone who's not fully trained, who's seeing patients and clients under your care. If they make a mistake, it's a reflection on you. So it's a risky thing for them to do as well, right? And so what we see is that there's a real bottleneck there. I mean, I don't know if it's really going to happen, but I would love to see more psychologists be encouraged to come from abroad. When the British left Malaysia, we had no doctors. They just, they were all the doctors were English pretty much. And then when they all went off to other parts of other colonies and then back to the UK, and there were no doctors. So what did the Prime Minister and the government do at the time? They went to India, they went to other places, and they imported loads of doctors. And they started a homegrown medical industry, and now, it's flourishing.
It's flourishing, but But
Malaysia has very good healthcare, right? I mean, overall. We have medical tourism, even people come here for healthcare. And so, is it perfect? Of course not, nothing is, but by international standards, it's very good. And there's no reason that clinical psychology couldn't be done in a similar way, where we bring people in who are qualified, bring people in who want to teach, who want to grow the field, who are excited and interested. We pay them a reasonable salary, and we grow the field that way because we open up the ability for the universities to take on more students, to graduate more people, and the industry naturally flourishes through that.
And of course, the festivities are are honest, and based on the people that I've spoken to, and they are pretty anxious about the whole thing, about meeting family members that might not necessarily be, accommodative to who they are. They might not necessarily want to meet these people, but they have to. It's Raya after all. How do you see this? Is this an issue globally? And of course, how do you want to advise them on how they approach these kind of issues?
Yeah, so there's a few things I'd say about that. So the first of all is if someone's thinking they're going to be celebrating on their own, almost against their will, right? They cannot balik kampung because they're too far, or they've got work, or their health doesn't permit it for some reason. There are things you can do to sort of have the festivities on your own, right? So there's festivities we can think of as having a spiritual, religious element to them. Most do. And then there's a social element to it, right? So there's no reason that someone can't celebrate the spiritual, religious elements themselves, right? Nothing's stopping you from going to a mosque, going to church, going to a temple, eating the foods that are traditional, doing all those kinds of things, saying the prayers you're supposed to say during those festivities. And those can be inherently very meaningful, right? Without anything else in baggage attached to Uncle so-and-so who's, not very nice. Then you've got the social side. And there's a real loss, when we're isolated. It's a huge problem for our mental health, actually just in society in general. We're rapidly becoming this very connected, very lonely society. Where people are, have thousands of friends theoretically online and don't really ever interact with anyone. And so, there's this may be a little controversial, but there's a saying that blood is thicker than water. And when people hear that, they think, well, that means I need to put everything aside for my family and all that stuff. But actually the full statement is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb.
Oh, okay.
The connection that you make with people is thicker than just the biological thing that happens. And so there is this concept of found family. There are friends, there are coworkers, there are people in your life that you can celebrate with, right? And people who are around you physically that you might be able to spend time with during these festivities that are important to you, valuable to you, meaningful to you. And if it's really intolerable to go, back to wherever the family always meets every year, then fine. Having said that, though, I do worry about these sort of increasing divides, right? Where people become less tolerant of different views, less able to listen to each other, less able to take criticism, and less able to give criticism in a way that's heartfelt and warm, as opposed to just cruel and sharp. Exactly. And we have to balance this idea of found family and being with your chosen people and this kind of stuff with this other idea of we don't want to be rejecting people just because they have different views from us, right? And we want to actually have a rich life that is diverse, which means that we're interacting with all sorts of different people. So if it's tolerable to someone, if they can tahan, I would recommend that they go see their family. If it's truly going to mess their mental health up, then I'd say you do what's best for your well-being.
And of course, what's best for the mental well-being is perhaps very subjective. How do you guide your patients, at least, in terms of trying to find what's best for themselves, perhaps even find meaning for themselves?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So a lot of what psychologists do, people think, especially as clinical psychologists, oh, it's a checklist of symptoms, and you go through is depression, anxiety, blah, 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 and you're just treating the symptoms. But there's a human being there who's completely unique. Two instances of depression can look completely different. Literally, they might have one overlapping symptom, but they're both diagnosable depression. And so we really have to work with the individual, right? We have to understand what their history is, what their values are, what their situation is economically, socially, with their family, with their loved ones. And we have to, there are some core things that kind of give people a sense of well-being in life, right? So meaning that you just mentioned is one, socialization is another, physical movement is a third. And also a general sense of security and safety, which often comes from finances, but can come from other things as well, economic, global stability, things like that. So we want to work on these. These are kind of universals, but how they apply to an individual will be unique. So I don't know the meaning of life, right? If I did, I would be some guru on a hill. But I'm a strong believer that we can find meaning in our lives, right? And this isn't some esoteric woo-woo thing. There's data behind this, right? So what correlates with people who say they have high meaning in their life? Well, there's a few things. The first and very important one is a sense of connectedness, a realness, right? So they feel connected to the world around them, to the people around them, to the work that they're doing. People who have a sense of meaninglessness often feel like they're adrift, right? Sailing without a rudder, buffeted around. And so a sense of meaning often comes from this sense of like groundedness in the reality that you're in. And we can work on that through somatic ways, getting people grounded in their body, but also through talking about what are the things that they care about. So one of the great diagnostic questions that all your viewers can ask themselves is that if you were dead, what is something you would care about and want to do well, even though you're not there anymore? And different people will say all sorts of things, right? The guy who joins the military at 18 years old, he'll say, my country, I want Malaysia to do really well. The mother or the father will say, I want my kids to do really well. Someone will say, I want my dog, my cat to do well, even if I was dead. You got no reference point for how they're doing. You get no enjoyment out of the fact they're doing well. You got nothing, but you still care. That's a meaningful thing to you. And then the second question, which we'd follow up with often, is how much time or impact do you spend on that, right? So if the thing you care about is your country, did you join the military or the government or social services or a policeman or something where you feel you're contributing to this thing you care about? If the thing you care about is your family, how much time are you spending with your kids? How much time are you spending with your loved ones, your parents, whoever? If it's your pet, you take them to the park on the weekend, whatever. For each person, it's going to be different, but most people are going to have something. For those who truly cannot think of anything, then we have to go into other issues, because often there's trauma or there are things that are sort of really disconnecting them from feeling connected to the world around them because it doesn't feel safe.
I know a person that when asked about this hypothetical question, this person is unable to say what this person really feels about strongly after this person dies. And this person is not has been diagnosed for something else, but is not diagnosed as depression.
Sure.
But this person says, when I die. It's fine. So I'm not too sure, what's up with, because for me, it's my kids.
Yeah.
I really want them to just be happy after I go. That's all. And they can feed themselves, have a good life, build connection with whoever they meet, including having good partners. I was blessed with having a good partner. So, that's my answer. But for this person, it's like this person can't think of anything.
There's two ways that this person may be taking the question, right? So one is that they're taking it from a sort of like religious perspective. What happens when we die? I die, it's fine. I don't really care, right? And they're not really thinking afterlife and all this kind of stuff. They don't mind. That's fair, right? So some people will believe in an afterlife, some people won't. The afterlife you believe in will vary depending on your faith.
Yeah.
That's all well and good. And if you're someone who doesn't really believe that you think that you die, you're just gone, that doesn't mean that there is no meaning, right? That just means that you won't be continuing along.
Yeah.
Now, if the person's truly unable to find anything they care about, that they would care about, that they cared now, that it continues after they die, then I would want to know, where they get their sense of well-being from.
Because
how
this person
impacts.
is a parent of 2 young children. It's like,
yes, I don't want to deny your story. I would just be surprised if they didn't care about how their children do after they die. So I just wonder how they took the question.
Because
I wasn't there for the.
Of course. I mean, I'm just saying. Yeah.
So that's one, and then socialization is this other thing, right? So a lot of people, they come and see us, and these things are intricately, deeply connected.
Yeah, I mean, this person has childhood trauma. Make no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
when we have trauma, there's a fantastic theory of trauma by Porges called the polyvagal theory of trauma, which basically says how our nervous system and how our brain reacts to trauma. And generally, we'll go into two states during a trauma. We'll go into a fight or flight state. I'm sure people have heard of this, where they are activated, they're excited, they're going to run, they're going to fight, they're going to move. This state tends to not result in too much trauma, usually. What's interesting is that there's another F, that's fight and flight, but there's also freeze. And in a situation where a person's in a really traumatic situation, where they are in danger, serious danger, deeply terrified, and there's nothing they can do about it. They cannot run. They cannot fight because it's a parent who's bigger than them, or it's their boss, or it's something where it's societally inappropriate for them to make a scene in this outdoor place. Yeah. They get frozen. And when we're in this frozen state, that can lead to a lot of problems down the line because that you're not able to express that energy outward. You're not able to resolve it. And then this can lead to ongoing feelings of feeling numb, feeling disconnected. Depression can come from it, but not necessarily, right? And this is this other thing that, we were talking about those statistics from those studies, 4% diagnosable depression. There's no real study on how many people are subclinically depressed, right?
Sorry, there's a term for that, subclinical.
So to be depressed, you have to reach a clinical threshold. Right? The same way you're not obese until you reach a certain number on the scale.
Got it. Right.
You can be a bit overweight, but you're not obese until you hit a number. Yeah. Depression is kind of the same thing. Until it's impacting you a certain amount, we don't give you the diagnosis. But you can still be kind of miserable. You can still be kind of sad, not motivated, kind of moping, and all those kinds of things. It's just may not be sufficiently severe to warrant diagnosis and medication. Now, I don't have the data to support this, but I think it's a safe bet to say that for the number of clinical depression, there's going to be a larger number of subclinical.
That's how it works.
Right.
A funnel.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so the issue we talk about these statistics, right? Now, a lot of people who are clinically depressed are going to be missing these things in meaning and socialization, and movement and these other core elements. But a lot of people who are missing these things are perfectly functional. They can wake up every day, brush their teeth, have a shower, go to work, kiss their wife, hug their kids, all the stuff they need to do. But they just kind of go around feeling, You know what I mean? And this doesn't get picked up. And these people generally don't look for help either, because that's just how life is, right? Especially if it's long and ongoing. And these subclinical issues are massive. You think about how productive you are on your best day versus the day you woke up kind of feeling crap, right? Now imagine that you were on the wrong side of that every day, right? And you're not bad enough to really warrant seeing a doctor, to really warrant getting medication done, but you're just kind of, think of all the productivity you missed, think of all the joy you missed in your life, think of all those things. It's really tragic. And this is actually one of those things therapy is really good for, right? We can work with these clinical cases, and I'll talk about those counselors. But those subclinical cases as well often stem from those same underlying core needs not being met. Meaning, socialization, movement, connection.
There's a few therapies that I think the public would probably be familiar with, including CBT, ACT, and many more. Do you think that these folks would be better served if, instead of just Googling it or watching a few YouTube videos, actually talk it out with counselors and therapists and psychologists?
So I'm biased on this.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that they would benefit from it, because what we do is literally designed, tested, measured to get results in this domain, right? There's great studies that say, what is the effectiveness of talking to a friend, talking to a loved one, talking to a spiritual advisor or priest or an imam, or and talking to a therapist. And the friend is right at the bottom of effectiveness. So having friends is great, and it's very, very important. But walking through your problems with your friends tends to not do that much. And I think we've all experienced this, right? Where you tell your friend your problem and they say, oh, you should just do this thing. And you're like, yeah, if I could do that, I wouldn't be talking to you about this, right? Like, obviously.
I'm depressed. You should
just go for a run, right? And we're like, yeah. And so friends are often, the issue is that they're not particularly trained in how to deal with this, right? So they will put themselves in your shoes and they'll say, well, what I would do is this, and they'll give you the advice, and great, doesn't really work. Family, kind of the same problem, right? Spiritual advisors can be pretty good, actually. Generally not bad. They've been found to be effective. And therapists, psychologists and stuff also found to be effective. So if people are struggling, the other thing, right, we're talking about that socialization issue. People are often very isolated, right? Like we have a lot of connections online, but a lot of people sort of supplement their social life with social media, you know, with scrolling or with video calls and stuff. And it's just not nourishing in the same way like real socialization is. And so it's enough to kind of satisfy the hunger a little bit, but really doesn't meet the needs. I think of it as like a cheeseburger, or like, you know, some fast food, right? Like if you're starving, having a McDonald's cheeseburger is going to be way better than nothing, right? And I wouldn't begrudge anyone to have it. But let's not pretend like that's what the basis of a diet should be, right? And these kinds of issues of social media, profound sense of disconnection, right? Because you're seeing everybody else separate from you, doing things without you, right? You get issues relating to comparison, right? Comparison is the thief of joy. When we're scrolling through Instagram or TikTok and stuff, all you're seeing is people who are doing better than you, because that's all anyone posts is their holiday pictures. They got a bonus, they got a raise, they post their pictures of their kids, happy photos. That's all they post. So social comparison, can be really toxic. And then anger baiting and hate and fear mongering and stuff that happens in social media as well. So all these things combined make it really dangerous. And because of that, people often don't have good friends they can talk to. You know, one of the questions I ask in pretty much the beginning of every time we see a new client is, do you have someone you could tell anything to? And the majority of my clients say no.
Well, that's a good way of ending this, or I suppose adjourning this discussion. But thanks, Chris, for sharing some of the ideas. And for you guys, if you want to learn more about this, Google Chris Henshaw. He has a practice that you guys can visit. Of course, the public scene is a little bit more accessible, and if you want to get access to public mental health care, the best way to go is to visit Klinik Kesehatan and get a referral letter for you to visit Department of Psychiatry from one of the big hospitals in your areas. And until then, I really wish you all the best, and if you want to seek help, you can. This is me signing off. Catch you in the next one.